They say that the deepest wounds come from those we love most. I never understood the full weight of those words until the morning when my own daughter looked me in the eyes and told me it was for my own good, as two strangers in uniforms escorted me out of the house I had called home for 43 years. My name is Serafina Blackwood. I am 78 years old, and what I am about to share with you will shake you to your core. Because sometimes the greatest betrayal comes wrapped in the guise of love, and sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected places. You see, I thought I knew what heartbreak was. I buried my husband Thomas 5 years ago after 51 years of marriage. I held his hand as he took his last breath in that sterile hospital room, and I thought that was the deepest pain a human heart could endure. But I was wrong. So very wrong. Because losing someone to death is one thing, but losing someone to betrayal while they are still alive and breathing is a torment that words cannot capture. For 78 years, I have walked this earth believing that family was sacred, that the bonds between a mother and her children were unbreakable, that love would always triumph over selfishness. I raised my children with these values, teaching them that family comes first, that we protect each other, that we honor our elders. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own ambitions, to ensure they had everything they needed, and in return, I expected nothing more than their love and respect in my twilight years. But life has a way of teaching us lessons we never asked to learn. And the lesson I learned on that cold October morning in Portland, Oregon, is that sometimes the people we trust most are capable of the most unthinkable acts. Sometimes the very ones we would die for are the ones who bury us alive. I want you to imagine for a moment what it would feel like to wake up in your own bed, in your own home, surrounded by the memories of a lifetime, only to be told that you no longer have the right to be there. Imagine having strangers walk into your sanctuary and declare that you are no longer capable of caring for yourself, that your own flesh and blood has decided you are a burden that needs to be removed. Imagine the confusion, the terror, the complete helplessness as your entire world crumbles in the span of 15 minutes. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal, if you have ever questioned whether forgiveness is possible when the wound runs so deep, then please stay with me. Leave a comment below telling me where you are watching from. And if this story resonates with your heart, please subscribe to our channel because your support means everything to us. We are building a community of souls who understand that healing is possible, even in the darkest of times. Now let me take you back to the beginning of this journey. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before that terrible morning changed everything. My house on Maple Street was more than just a building. It was a living, breathing testament to a life well lived. Every creaking floorboard told a story. Every photograph on the mantel held a memory. The kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family still smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla from the cookies I baked every Sunday for my grandchildren. The living room where Thomas and I had danced to our wedding song on our 50th anniversary still echoed with laughter from family gatherings. I was not a helpless old woman, despite what the official documents would later claim. Every morning, I would wake at 6:30, just as I had for decades. I would brew my coffee in the same blue ceramic mug Thomas had given me for our 10th anniversary. I would tend to my rose garden, the one I had been cultivating for 30 years, where each bloom represented a different milestone in my family's life. The red roses for love, the pink ones for gratitude, the white ones for remembrance of those who had passed. My daily routine was as precise as clockwork. After my morning coffee and garden time, I would call my sister Margaret in Seattle. We would chat for exactly 20 minutes about everything and nothing. Then I would walk to the corner market, a journey of 6 blocks that I had been making for over 4 decades. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, would always save me the freshest fruits and vegetables. We would exchange pleasantries about the weather, about his grandchildren, about the changing neighborhood. In the afternoons, I would often have visitors. My grandchildren would stop by after school, backpacks heavy with homework and hearts full of stories about their day. I would help them with their mathematics, listen to their teenage troubles, and send them home with their bellies full of homemade cookies and their hearts full of grandmother-ass love. Wednesday evenings were reserved for my book club, where 8 ladies of a certain age would gather to discuss literature and life with equal passion. Sundays were sacred in our family. After attending morning service at St. Mary Anne's Episcopal Church, where I had worshipped for over 40 years, my children and grandchildren would gather at my house for our traditional family dinner. The dining room table would stretch to accommodate everyone, laden with roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables from my garden, and always, always, my famous apple pie that had won the county fair 3 years running. Cordelia, my eldest daughter, was 49 years old and had always been the responsible one. She was a nurse at Portland General Hospital, a job she had held for 26 years. She had married Marcus 15 years ago, a man I had welcomed into our family with open arms despite my initial reservations. Marcus was a salesman, charming and smooth-talking, but there was something about his eyes that never quite met mine when he spoke. Still, he made Cordelia happy, and that was enough for me. My son David lived in California with his wife and twin boys. He worked in technology, something I never quite understood but was immensely proud of. He would call every Tuesday evening without fail, and we would talk for hours about his work, his children, his dreams. David had always been my sensitive child, the one who wore his heart on his sleeve, and even as a grown man, he still sought my advice on important matters. Then there was my youngest, Rebecca, 38 years old and still finding her way in the world. She was an artist, a free spirit who traveled frequently for her work. She would send me postcards from exotic locations, each one a little window into the adventures I had never had. Rebecca was the one who would call me at random times just to say, "I love you, Mom," for no reason at all. This was my life. This was my world. A world built on love, tradition, and the unshakable belief that family was forever. I was not perfect, mind you. I had my opinions, my stubborn streaks, my moments of maternal interference. But I was a woman who had earned her place in this world through decades of sacrifice and service to others. I had my health, my faculties, my independence. Yes, I moved a little slower than I used to. Yes, I sometimes forgot where I put my reading glasses. Yes, I had to write grocery lists to remember everything I needed. But these were the normal signs of aging, not evidence of incompetence. I still balanced my checkbook to the penny. I still drove my car safely to church and the market. I still remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every important date in my family's life. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks before that awful morning. Cordelia had been visiting more frequently, asking strange questions about my finances, about my will, about whether I had considered making things easier for the family. She would walk through the house with a critical eye, commenting on the steep stairs, the old plumbing, the hazards of living alone in such a big house. "Mom, you are not getting any younger," she would say, her voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. "What if you fall? What if something happens and no one is here to help you?" I would brush off her concerns with the confidence of a woman who had been caring for herself and others for nearly 8 decades. "Cordelia, dear, I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself. This is my home, and I intend to stay here until the good Lord calls me home." But she would persist, bringing Marcus into the conversations. He would nod gravely at her words, adding his own observations about the burden I was placing on the family by insisting on my independence. They spoke in hushed tones about assisted living facilities, about the quality of life I could have if I just admitted I needed help. I remember one particular afternoon when Cordelia sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I had bandaged her scraped knees as a child, where I had helped her with her homework, where I had given her advice about boys and careers and marriage. She held my hands in hers, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared her. "Mom," she said, her voice soft and pleading, "I worry about you every single day. I lay awake at night thinking about what could happen to you here alone. Please, just consider looking at some nice facilities, places where you would have people around, where you would be safe." I squeezed her hands and looked into her eyes, seeing what I thought was genuine concern. "Sweetheart, I understand that you worry, but worrying is what children do about their parents. It is natural, and it comes from love. But I am still your mother, and I am still capable of making my own decisions. This house is not just where I live, it is who I am. Every room holds memories of your father, of you children growing up, of the life we built together. Asking me to leave would be like asking me to abandon my own soul. She smiled sadly and kissed my forehead. I know, Mom, I know, but promise me you will think about it. I promised I would think about it, never imagining that she had already made the decision for me. The second sign came when Marcus began showing up at odd hours, always with some excuse about checking on me or helping with maintenance. He would walk through the house with an appraising eye, commenting on the value of the antiques, the size of the rooms, the potential of the property. At the time, I thought he was just being helpful, maybe even thinking about improvements he could make for me. One evening, I overheard him on the phone in my living room while I was preparing tea in the kitchen. His voice was low, but the walls in old houses are thin, and I caught fragments of his conversation. The place is worth at least $400,000 when prime location, once we get her out of there. I convinced myself I had misheard. Surely my son-in-law was not discussing my home as if it were already his. Surely the man my daughter had married would not be making plans for my property while I was still very much alive and competent. But doubt, once planted, grows like a weed in the garden of trust. The third and final sign came just 2 days before that October morning. Cordelia arrived at my house with a manila folder full of papers. She sat me down in my living room, in the same chair where Thomas used to read his evening newspaper, and spread the documents across my coffee table. Mom, I have been doing some research, and I found this wonderful place called Sunset Gardens Senior Care. It is not far from here, and they have beautiful rooms and excellent care. I think you would really love it there. I glanced at the glossy brochures showing smiling elderly people engaged in crafts and gardening activities. The facilities looked pleasant enough, but they were not my home. Cordelia, we have discussed this. I am not interested in moving to a facility. I am perfectly happy here. Her expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. Mom, you are not being reasonable. This is not just about what you want anymore. This is about what is best for everyone. Everyone? I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Who is everyone? This is my life, my home, my decision. Marcus stepped forward then, his presence suddenly feeling menacing rather than supportive. Serafina, we are trying to help you understand that you are not seeing this clearly. Your judgment is not what it used to be. You are putting yourself and others at risk by insisting on staying here alone. I felt my blood pressure rising, my hands trembling with indignation. My judgment is perfectly fine, Marcus, and I will thank you not to speak to me as if I am a child. Cordelia reached across the table and took my hand, her grip tighter than necessary. Mom, please. We have already spoken to a doctor about your situation. He agrees that you need more care than you are willing to admit. We are not doing this to hurt you. We are doing this because we love you. What doctor? I demanded. I have not seen any doctor, except Dr. Williams for my annual checkup, and he told me I was in remarkable health for a woman my age. They exchanged a look that sent ice through my veins, a look that spoke of secrets and plans made without my knowledge or consent. Mom, Cordelia said slowly, we cannot force you to see reason, but we can make sure you are safe. One way or another, you are going to get the care you need. I stood up then, my body shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. Get out, both of you. Get out of my house right now. They gathered their papers and left, but not before Marcus turned back to me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. We will be in touch, Serafina, very soon. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in my bedroom, looking out at the rose garden Thomas and I had planted together, wondering if I was losing my mind. Was I truly becoming a burden? Was my judgment really impaired? Or was something much darker happening in the shadows of my family? I called my sister Margaret in Seattle. Her voice was groggy with sleep, but she listened as I poured out my fears and concerns. Serafina, she said when I finished, trust your instincts. You are one of the sharpest women I know. If something feels wrong, it probably is. 2 mornings later, I woke to the sound of knocking at my front door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in uniforms, Cordelia and Marcus, standing on my porch. In Cordelia Aya's hand was a manila folder, and in her eyes was a determination that made my blood run cold. When I opened the door, one of the uniformed men spoke in a voice that was professionally kind, but utterly inflexible. We are here to escort you to Sunset Gardens Senior Care Facility. We have the proper documentation for your transfer. Transfer? I whispered, the word tasting like poison in my mouth. What transfer? I never agreed to any transfer. Cordelia stepped forward, her face a mask of false concern. Mom, we explained this to you. The doctor has determined that you need supervised care. We are not doing this to be cruel. We are doing this because we love you and want you to be safe. I looked at these people standing in my doorway, these strangers who held papers declaring me incompetent, and my own daughter who had signed them, and I realized that my world was about to end. Not with a bang, but with a whisper of betrayal so profound it would haunt me for months to come. Please, I said, my voice barely audible. Please, just let me pack a bag. Let me take some of my things. Ma? You can collect your belongings later, the uniformed man said. Right now, we need to get you to the facility for your safety and well-being. And so, wearing nothing but my nightgown and a thin robe, with my hair unbrushed and my dignity in tatters, I was led away from the life I had built, the home I had loved, the independence I had fought so hard to maintain. As we drove through the streets of Portland, I pressed my face against the window of the transport vehicle, watching my neighborhood disappear behind me. The corner market where Mr. Henderson always saved me the best produce. The park where I had pushed my children on swings 40 years ago. The church where Thomas and I had been married, where I had prayed every Sunday for more than 4 decades. All of it fading away like a dream I could never return to. When we arrived at Sunset Gardens Senior Care, I was processed like a piece of luggage. Forms were filled out, medical bracelets were attached to my wrist, and I was assigned to room 214, which I would share with a woman named Ethel, who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of confusion. Cordelia stayed long enough to sign the final papers, her face a mask of guilt and determination. Before she left, she approached my bed where I sat staring at the white walls that would now define my world. Mom, she said, her voice breaking slightly, I know you are angry with me right now, but someday you will understand that this was the right thing to do. Someday you will see that we did this because we love you. I looked at her then, this woman who had grown in my womb, who had nursed at my breast, who had called me Mama and Mommy and Mom throughout all the stages of her life, and I spoke the words that would echo in the silence between us for months to come. Love, I said quietly, does not destroy what it claims to protect. Love does not lie and manipulate and betray. What you have done to me today has nothing to do with love, Cordelia, and I am not sure I will ever be able to forgive you for it. She stood there for a moment, tears streaming down her face, and then she turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. That night, lying in a narrow bed in a room that smelled of disinfectant and despair, staring at a ceiling that had witnessed the final moments of countless forgotten souls, I wondered if this was how my story would end. If I would simply fade away in this place, another casualty of a system that treats the elderly as problems to be solved rather than human beings to be honored. But God had other plans for me. Plans that would test every fiber of my being, that would challenge everything I thought I knew about forgiveness and redemption, that would ultimately lead me to a truth so profound it would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me. The journey was just beginning, and the destination was more extraordinary than I could have ever imagined. But extraordinary destinations often require us to walk through the valley of the shadow of death first. And that valley, for me, was the endless corridor of Sunset Gardens Senior Care, where hope goes to die and dreams are buried beneath layers of institutional routine and medicated compliance. The first week in that place nearly broke me completely. I had always been a woman of purpose, of routine, of meaningful activity. Now my days were measured not by accomplishments or joy, but by meal times and medication schedules. Breakfast at 7:30, always the same bland oatmeal and lukewarm coffee. Morning activities at 9, which consisted of infantile crafts projects designed to stimulate cognitive function. Lunch at 12:30, dinner at 5:30, lights out at 9. My entire existence reduced to the predictable rhythm of institutional care. My roommate Ethel was a frail woman of 84 who spent most of her time calling out for her deceased husband Harold. "Harold, where are you?" "Bus," she would cry in the middle of the night. "Harold, I cannot find my way home." Her confusion was heartbreaking, but it also served as a constant reminder of what Cordelia and Marcus had claimed about me. Was this my future? Was this the inevitable decline they had used to justify their actions? The nursing staff, while not unkind, treated us all with the patronizing patience reserved for children or pets. "Good morning, Serafina," they would say in voices artificially bright and cheerful. "Did we sleep well last night? Are we ready for our medication?" The constant use of "we on" instead of "you" was particularly galling, as if acknowledging our individual humanity was somehow unprofessional. I refused to participate in most activities during those first weeks. While other residents shuffled to the recreation room for bingo or simple exercises, I would sit in my assigned chair by the window, staring out at the parking lot and watching the world continue without me. Cars would come and go, visitors would arrive to see their loved ones, and life would march on while I remained trapped in this sterile limbo. The visits from my family were sporadic and painful. Cordelia would arrive every few days, usually with Marcus in tow, their faces wearing expressions of forced cheer that fooled no one. They would sit beside my bed and make small talk about the weather, about the grandchildren, about everything except the enormous elephant in the room, the fact that they had stolen my life from me. "You look good, Mom," Cordelia would say, her eyes avoiding mine. "The staff says you are adjusting well." Adjusting, as if what had happened to me was a natural transition rather than a calculated betrayal. As if adapting to imprisonment was a skill to be praised rather than a tragedy to be mourned. David called from California every few days, his voice heavy with guilt and confusion. "Mom, I had no idea what Cordelia was planning. If I had known, I would have fought it. I would have hired lawyers. I would have flown up there immediately. But what could he have done from 3,000 miles away? What could anyone have done once the wheels of legal manipulation had been set in motion? The papers had been signed. The doctors had been consulted. The system had been navigated with the precision of people who had clearly done their research. Rebecca was traveling in Europe when it happened, completely unaware of the family crisis until she called my house and got a disconnected number. When she finally tracked me down at Sunset Gardens, she was hysterical with rage and disbelief. "Mom, this is insane," she sobbed over the phone. "This is kidnapping. This is elder abuse. We need to get you out of there immediately." But getting me out was not as simple as it sounded. The legal documents that had put me there were binding and complex. Without evidence of fraud or incompetence on the part of those who had signed them, I was legally committed to remain at Sunset Gardens until a judge decided otherwise. And challenging such decisions required resources, time, and expertise that none of us possessed. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself sinking into a darkness deeper than any I had ever experienced. The grief was overwhelming, but it was not the clean grief of death that I had felt when Thomas passed away. This was the messy, complicated grief of betrayal, of watching someone you love destroy you while claiming to act out of love. I stopped eating regularly, picking at my meals like a bird, my appetite disappearing along with my will to live. I stopped combing my hair with care, stopped putting on the small touches of makeup that had always made me feel human. What was the point of maintaining my appearance when I was no longer living a life worth maintaining? The nights were the worst. Lying in that narrow bed, listening to Ethel's confused murmurings and the constant hum of medical equipment, I would stare at the ceiling and replay every moment of my relationship with Cordelia. Where had I gone wrong? What had I done to deserve this treatment? How had the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard grown into a woman capable of such cruelty? I remembered the night she was born, how I had held her tiny body against my chest and promised her that I would always protect her, always love her, always be there for her. I remembered her first steps, her first words, her first day of school when she cried and clung to my leg, afraid to let me go. I remembered the pride I felt when she graduated from nursing school, when she got her first job, when she married Marcus in my backyard under the rose arbor that Thomas had built. All of those memories now felt poisoned, tainted by the knowledge that the person I had loved most in the world had been capable of betraying me so completely. But it was not just the betrayal that tormented me. It was the realization that I had been blind to the signs, that I had failed to see the gradual change in my daughter's character, the way money and security had slowly corrupted her values. When had she stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as an obstacle to her financial stability? The other residents at Sunset Gardens had their own stories of abandonment and betrayal. There was Harold, a retired mechanic whose son had convinced him to sign over his house and then promptly moved him into the facility. There was Margaret, a former teacher whose daughter lived in the same city but had not visited in over 6 months. There was Frank, a war veteran whose family had grown tired of his stories and his medications and his need for attention. Listening to their stories should have made me feel less alone, but instead, it made me feel more hopeless. We were all casualties of a culture that views aging as a disease to be managed rather than a natural progression to be honored. We were all victims of families who had found it easier to warehouse us than to care for us. It was during my 3rd month at Sunset Gardens that I met Mabel Patterson, a volunteer who came every Wednesday to read to the residents. Mabel was 72 years old, a widow like myself, but she radiated a peace and contentment that seemed almost impossible in our circumstances. She would sit in the recreation room with a small group of residents, reading from various books and magazines, her voice gentle and melodious. But it was not just her reading that drew me to her. It was the way she looked at each of us, really looked at us, as if she saw not just the broken-down bodies and confused minds, but the human beings we still were beneath all the institutional trappings. After several weeks of listening to her read, I approached her during one of her visits. "Mabel," I said quietly, "may I ask you something?" She smiled warmly, her eyes kind and patient. "Of course, dear. What is on your mind?" "How do you do it?" I asked. "How do you come here every week and maintain such a positive attitude? How do you not despair when you see what we have all become?" She took my hand in hers, her skin soft but strong. "Serafina, what I see when I look at you is not what you have become. What I see is who you have always been. You are still the same woman who raised children and loved a husband and contributed to your community. Being here does not change your worth or your value. It only changes your circumstances." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I had allowed my circumstances to define me, to reduce me to nothing more than a victim of my daughter's greed and manipulation. "But how do you find peace when you have been so badly hurt?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mabel was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if she were looking into her own painful past. "Serafina, I lost my only son in a car accident 15 years ago. He was 28 years old, married, with a baby on the way. The accident was caused by a drunk driver who walked away without a scratch." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Oh, Mabel, I am so sorry." For 5 years after that accident, I was consumed by hatred. Hatred for the drunk driver, hatred for God, hatred for a world that could allow such injustice. I stopped going to church, stopped seeing friends, stopped participating in life. I was so focused on my pain that I forgot how to feel anything else. "What changed?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. I realized that my hatred was not hurting the drunk driver. It was not bringing my son back. It was not serving any purpose except to poison my own soul. I was choosing to remain in hell when heaven was still available to me. Her words resonated in my chest like a bell being struck. "But how do you forgive someone who has taken everything from you?" "Forgiveness," Mabel said slowly, "is not about the other person deserving it. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the prison of your own anger. It is about choosing to live again instead of choosing to die slowly from the inside out." That night, for the first time in months, I prayed. Not the angry, desperate prayers I had offered in the immediate aftermath of my betrayal, but a quiet, searching prayer for wisdom and strength. I asked God to help me understand how to move forward, how to find peace in the midst of such profound pain. The answer did not come immediately. In fact, it took several more weeks of conversations with Mabel before I began to see the path forward. She would visit me outside of her regular reading sessions, bringing me small gifts like fresh flowers from her garden or books of poetry that spoke to the healing of the human spirit. Slowly, I began to participate in some of the activities at Sunset Gardens. Not because I enjoyed them, but because I realized that my refusal to engage was just another form of self-imprisonment. I started attending Mabel EOS reading sessions regularly, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of stories and the gentle community of listeners. I also began to observe my fellow residents more closely, seeing them not as cautionary tales of my own future, but as human beings with their own stories of love and loss, triumph and tragedy. Harold, the mechanic, had built engines for racing cars in his youth and had stories of adventure that rivaled any novel. Margaret, the teacher, had educated 3 generations of children and could recite poetry from memory with a beauty that brought tears to my eyes. We were not just the discarded elderly. We were repositories of history, carriers of wisdom, witnesses to decades of human experience. Our families had forgotten our value, but that did not mean we had lost it. It was during my 4th month at Sunset Gardens that I received an unexpected visitor. A man in his 50s, wearing a well-tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase, approached the reception desk and asked to speak with me. The staff nurse brought him to the recreation room where I was sitting with Mabel, working on a jigsaw puzzle. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, extending his hand, "my name is Theodore Ashworth. I am an attorney with Ashworth and Associates. I wonder if we might have a private conversation." My heart began to race. Visitors were rare enough, but attorneys were unheard of. What could this man possibly want with me? We moved to a small conference room that the facility used for family meetings. Theodore Ashworth sat across from me, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began, "I represent a group of investigators who specialize in cases of elder abuse and financial exploitation. We have been conducting an investigation into the circumstances surrounding your admission to this facility." I felt the room spin around me. "Investigation?" "Yes, ma'am. We have reason to believe that your daughter and son-in-law may have committed fraud in order to gain control of your assets and arrange for your involuntary commitment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Fraud, of course. The pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. The sudden interest in my finances, the questions about my will, the mysterious doctor who had supposedly evaluated my mental capacity, the rushed nature of my removal from my home. "What kind of fraud?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Theodore opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We have evidence that suggests your daughter and son-in-law forged medical evaluations, falsified documents regarding your mental capacity, and manipulated the legal system to gain guardianship over you and your assets." I stared at the folder, my mind reeling. But why? Why would they do this? "Our investigation indicates that your son-in-law has been experiencing significant financial difficulties. His business has been failing for over a year, and he has accumulated substantial debts. Your home and assets represented a solution to his problems." The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. Not only had my daughter stolen my freedom, but she had done it to bail out her husband as failed business ventures. I had been sacrificed on the altar of their financial convenience. "What can be done?" I asked, my voice stronger now, fueled by a righteous anger that I had not felt in months. "We can file charges against them for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. We can work to have your guardianship revoked and your assets returned to your control. We can get you out of here and back to your life. Justice." After months of helplessness, the possibility of justice dangled before me like a lifeline. I could destroy them legally, financially, emotionally. I could make them pay for what they had done to me. But as I sat there, looking at the evidence of my daughter's betrayal, I heard Mabel's voice in my mind. Forgiveness is not about the other person deserving it. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the prison of your own anger. This was the moment of truth. This was the test that would determine not just my future, but the kind of person I would choose to be in the face of ultimate betrayal. The choice before me was clear: revenge or redemption, justice or mercy, destruction or healing. And in that sterile conference room, surrounded by the evidence of my daughter's crimes, I realized that the decision I made would not just determine Cordelia's fate. It would determine my own. The weight of that decision pressed down on me like a mountain. Theodore Ashworth sat patiently across from me, his pen poised over legal documents that could either restore my freedom or destroy my family forever. The evidence spread before us painted a picture of calculated deception that made my stomach turn. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, forged medical evaluations claiming I suffered from severe dementia, falsified documents stating I had voluntarily requested placement in a care facility. Mrs. Blackwood, Theodore said gently, I understand this is overwhelming, but you need to know that time is of the essence. The longer we wait, the more difficult it becomes to reverse the damage they have done. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling slightly. Mr. Ashworth, if we proceed with this, what exactly would happen to my daughter and son-in-law? His expression grew serious. Given the severity of the fraud and the amount of money involved, they would likely face felony charges. Your daughter could lose her nursing license permanently. Your son-in-law could face significant prison time. Their assets would be frozen, and they would be responsible for substantial restitution. The thought of Cordelia in prison, of Marcus behind bars, should have filled me with satisfaction. But instead, I felt only a deep, aching sadness. This was not how I had imagined my golden years would unfold. This was not the legacy I had wanted to leave for my grandchildren. May I have some time to consider this? I asked. Of course. But Mrs. Blackwood, I must advise you that waiting too long could jeopardize our case. Evidence can disappear. Witnesses can be influenced, and the legal system tends to favor quick action in cases like this. That night, I could not sleep. I walked the halls of Sunset Gardens, my slippers silent on the polished floors, my mind churning with possibilities and consequences. The facility was different at night, quieter but somehow more alive with the whispered conversations of nurses and the gentle sounds of people lost in dreams or nightmares. I found myself in the chapel, a small room with simple wooden pews and a stained glass window depicting Jesus with his arms outstretched. I had avoided this room during my months here, too angry with God to seek comfort in religious symbols. But now, facing the most important decision of my life, I felt drawn to this place of peace. I sat in the front pew and closed my eyes, trying to quiet the storm in my mind. God, I whispered, I do not know what to do. I have been betrayed by the person I love most in this world. I have been robbed of my dignity, my freedom, my home. Justice demands that I make them pay for what they have done. But my heart tells me that vengeance will not heal my wounds. The silence stretched around me like a blanket, and slowly, memories began to surface. Not the painful memories of betrayal, but earlier ones. Cordelia as a 5-year-old, coming to me with a scraped knee and trusting me completely to make the pain go away. Cordelia as a teenager, crying over her first heartbreak and seeking comfort in my arms. Cordelia as a young woman, calling me from nursing school to share her excitement about helping people heal. When had that caring, compassionate girl become capable of such cruelty? When had love been replaced by greed and trust by manipulation? The answer came to me slowly, like dawn breaking over a troubled landscape. It had not happened all at once. It had been a gradual erosion, a series of small compromises and justifications that had led to this moment. Marcus had been the catalyst, his financial problems and smooth talk gradually poisoning my daughter E.S. values. But Cordelia had made the choice to listen to him, to prioritize money over morality, to betray the mother who had given her life meaning. But even as I understood how we had arrived at this point, I found myself thinking about Mabel S. words. Forgiveness is not about the other person deserving it. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the prison of your own anger. Was I strong enough to forgive Cordelia? Was I brave enough to choose healing over revenge? The next morning, I asked the staff to arrange a meeting with Theodore Ashworth, but this time, I had a different request. Mr. Ashworth, I want to pursue the legal action to regain my freedom and my assets, but I do not want to press criminal charges against my daughter and son-in-law. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Mrs. Blackwood, I understand your reluctance to hurt your family, but these people have committed serious crimes. They have stolen from you, lied about you, and essentially imprisoned you. They deserve to face consequences for their actions. Perhaps they do, I said quietly. But I deserve to be free from the burden of hatred that has been consuming me. I want my life back, Mr. Ashworth. I want my home, my independence, my dignity, but I do not want to build my freedom on the destruction of my daughter Ant's life. He studied me for a long moment. Are you certain about this? Because once we begin proceedings, Cordelia and Marcus will likely fight us every step of the way. They will try to portray you as mentally incompetent. They will challenge every piece of evidence. They will make this as difficult as possible. I am certain, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. But I want to confront them personally before we proceed. I want to look my daughter in the eye and tell her what she has done to me. I want her to understand the full consequences of her choices. Theodore arranged a meeting for the following week. Cordelia and Marcus were summoned to his office under the pretense of discussing my care plan. They had no idea what awaited them. The day of the meeting, I dressed carefully in the one good dress I had been allowed to bring to Sunset Gardens. I styled my hair as best I could and applied a touch of lipstick. I wanted to face them as the woman I had always been, not the broken victim they had created. Mabel came to see me before I left. Are you ready for this, dear? As ready as I can be, I replied. Mabel, I want to thank you for showing me the path to forgiveness. I could not have found it without your guidance. She squeezed my hand. You found it yourself, Serafina. I just helped you see what was already in your heart. Theodore R.'s office was in a tall building downtown with windows that overlooked the city where I had lived my entire adult life. Cordelia and Marcus were already there when I arrived, sitting side by side on a leather sofa, their faces masks of false concern. Mom, Cordelia said, rising to embrace me. How wonderful to see you. You look so much better. The staff at Sunset Gardens says you are adjusting beautifully. I allowed her to hug me, feeling the familiar scent of her perfume and the shape of her body against mine. For a moment, I was transported back to all the times I had held her, comforted her, loved her unconditionally. But then I pulled away and looked directly into her eyes. Cordelia, we need to talk. Theodore cleared his throat. Please, everyone, have a seat. We have some important matters to discuss. As Cordelia and Marcus settled back onto the sofa, Theodore began to lay out the evidence. Bank statements showing unauthorized access to my accounts, forged medical documents claiming I suffered from severe dementia, falsified signatures on legal papers. With each piece of evidence, I watched the color drain from Cordelia A.'s face and saw Marcus shift uncomfortably in his seat. This is ridiculous, Marcus said when Theodore finished. A Serafina is clearly not competent to manage her own affairs. Anyone can see that her mental state has deteriorated significantly. Mr. Harrison, Theodore said calmly, we have independent medical evaluations that confirm Mrs. Blackwood's mental competency. We also have evidence that you and your wife forged the documents that were used to justify her commitment. Cordelia E.'s hands were shaking now. Mom, I can explain everything. We were trying to protect you. We were scared that you would hurt yourself or that someone would take advantage of you. I leaned forward in my chair, my voice steady and clear. Cordelia, look at me. Really look at me. Do I seem incompetent to you? Do I seem like someone who cannot make her own decisions? She could not meet my eyes. Mom, you were forgetting things. You were having trouble with your bills. We were worried about you living alone in that big house. I was forgetting where I put my reading glasses occasionally, I said. I was writing grocery lists to remember what I needed at the store. These are normal signs of aging, not evidence of incompetence. You know this, Cordelia. You are a nurse. You know the difference between normal aging and actual dementia. Tears began to stream down her face. Mom, I am sorry. I am so sorry. But we were desperate. Marcus's business was failing, and we were going to lose everything. We thought if we could just use some of your money to get back on our feet, we could pay it back later. Some of my money? I asked, my voice rising. Cordelia, you stole my entire life. You took my home, my independence, my dignity. You had me committed to an institution based on lies and forged documents. How did you think you were going to pay that back? Marcus stood up abruptly. This is insane. We are not going to sit here and be accused of crimes by a confused old woman. Cordelia, we are leaving. Sit down, Mr. Harrison, Theodore said firmly. You are both facing serious legal consequences for your actions. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, theft. These are felony charges that could result in significant prison time. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Cordelia S. sobbing. Marcus sat back down, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists. This was my moment. This was when I could choose destruction or healing, revenge or redemption. Cordelia, I said softly, look at me. She raised her tear-stained face to mine, and I saw in her eyes the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who trusted me to chase away all the monsters in the world. I want you to understand something, I continued. What you did to me was unforgivable. You betrayed my trust, stole my freedom, and justified it by claiming concern for my welfare. You made me question my own sanity, my own worth, my own right to exist independently. You caused me pain that I will carry for the rest of my life. Her sobbing intensified, and Marcus reached for her hand. But, I said, my voice growing stronger, I am not going to let your betrayal define the rest of my life. I am not going to let hatred consume what years I have left. I am going to forgive you, Cordelia. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free from the poison of anger. She looked up at me in shock. Mom, what are you saying? I am saying that Mr. Ashworth will be taking legal action to restore my freedom and my assets. I am saying that I will be returning to my home and my life. But I am also saying that I will not be pressing criminal charges against you. Marcus Dorr's relief was visible, but Cordelia seemed confused. I do not understand. Why would you do that? Because you are my daughter, I said simply. Because despite everything you have done, I still love you. Because holding on to hatred hurts me more than it hurts you. Because forgiveness is not about what you deserve, but about what I need to heal. I stood up and walked to where she sat. But understand this, Cordelia. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending this never happened. It does not mean that our relationship can go back to the way it was. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt slowly and carefully, and that work must come from you. She reached for my hand. Mom, I will do whatever it takes to make this right. I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness. You already have my forgiveness, I said. What you need to earn is my trust. And that will take time, honesty, and consistent action that proves you have learned from this experience. Over the following weeks, the legal proceedings moved quickly. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming, and Cordelia and Marcus offered no resistance to the restoration of my rights and assets. Within a month, I was back in my home on Maple Street, surrounded by the memories and possessions that had been stolen from me. But returning home was not the end of my journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by bitterness and anger, but by the transformative power of forgiveness. Cordelia kept her promise to work on rebuilding our relationship. She began attending therapy to address the issues that had led to her betrayal. She found a new job to replace the one she had lost when her crimes became public. She and Marcus sold their house and moved into a small apartment, using the proceeds to begin paying back the money they had stolen from me. More importantly, she began to show up in my life consistently and honestly. She would visit every Sunday, not with the forced cheer of someone fulfilling an obligation, but with the genuine desire to reconnect with the mother she had wronged. We would sit in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had bandaged her childhood wounds, and we would talk about everything and nothing. It was not easy. There were moments when the old anger would surface, when I would remember lying in that narrow bed at Sunset Gardens and feeling utterly abandoned. There were times when Cordelia would break down crying, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. But slowly, gradually, we began to rebuild something precious that had been shattered. David flew up from California to spend a week with me after I returned home. He helped me tend to my rose garden, which had been sadly neglected during my absence. As we worked together in the soil, removing weeds and dead blooms, he asked me the question that had been haunting him. Mom, how were you able to forgive Cordelia? If someone had done that to me, I do not think I could ever get past it. I paused in my weeding and looked at him. David, forgiveness is not about getting past something. It is about choosing to move forward despite it. What Cordelia did to me was wrong, and it caused me tremendous pain. But holding on to that pain was causing me even more suffering. Forgiveness was my way of choosing life over death, hope over despair. Rebecca returned from Europe and spent several weeks with me, helping me reclaim my home and my life. She was still angry with Cordelia, still struggling to understand how her sister could have done such a thing. But she watched as I worked to rebuild my relationship with Cordelia, and slowly she began to see the wisdom in choosing forgiveness over revenge. Mabel continued to visit me regularly, even after I left Sunset Gardens. She had become more than a mentor. She had become a dear friend. We would sit in my living room, sharing tea and stories, and she would remind me that the journey of forgiveness is not a destination, but a daily choice. "Serafina," she said one afternoon, "you have shown me something I did not know was possible. I forgave the man who killed my son, but I never thought about forgiving the family members who abandoned me in my grief. Watching you rebuild your relationship with Cordelia has inspired me to reach out to my own relatives." As the months passed, I began to see the full scope of what forgiveness had accomplished. It had not just healed my relationship with Cordelia, it had transformed my entire family. David and Rebecca, seeing how I had chosen grace over vengeance, began to heal their own old wounds and resentments. My grandchildren, who had been caught in the middle of the family drama, began to visit me again, bringing their homework and their stories and their unconditional love. But perhaps most importantly, forgiveness had healed me. The bitter, angry woman who had sat in that conference room considering revenge had been transformed into someone who could look at her daughter's face and see not the betrayer, but the beloved child who had lost her way. One Sunday evening, as Cordelia prepared to leave after our weekly visit, she paused at my front door. "Mom," she said, "I know I can never undo what I did to you. I know I can never give you back those months of freedom and dignity that I stole from you. But I want you to know that your forgiveness has changed me. It has shown me what real love looks like. It has taught me that grace is more powerful than justice, that mercy is stronger than revenge." I embraced her, feeling the familiar shape of her body against mine, and for the first time in over a year, it felt like holding my daughter again. "Cordelia," I said softly, "that is what forgiveness is supposed to do. It is not supposed to change the past. It is supposed to change the future." As I sit here now, in my living room, surrounded by the memories of a life well lived, I want to share with you the most important lesson I have learned. Betrayal is a part of the human experience. We will all be hurt by people we love, disappointed by those we trust, abandoned by those we depend on. But we have a choice in how we respond to that pain. We can choose to let it define us, to build walls around our hearts, to spend our remaining years nursing grievances and plotting revenge. Or we can choose the more difficult, but ultimately more rewarding path of forgiveness. We can choose to let go of the poison of anger and embrace the healing power of grace. Forgiveness does not mean becoming a doormat. It does not mean accepting abuse or pretending that harmful actions did not occur. It means choosing to free ourselves from the prison of our own bitterness. It means deciding that our peace is more valuable than our right to revenge. I am now 79 years old, and I can honestly say that the decision to forgive Cordelia was the most important decision of my life. It restored not just my relationship with my daughter, but my relationship with myself, with my family, and with God. It taught me that love is indeed stronger than hate, that grace is more powerful than justice, that mercy can triumph over revenge. If you are struggling with forgiveness today, if someone has betrayed your trust or broken your heart, I want you to know that healing is possible. It will not be easy, and it will not happen overnight. But if you can find the courage to choose forgiveness over revenge, grace over bitterness, you will discover a freedom that no one can take away from you. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. Thank you for listening to an old woman's journey from betrayal to healing, from anger to peace. And thank you for believing that even in our darkest moments, there is always a choice to be made between destruction and redemption. May you find the strength to choose forgiveness, the wisdom to rebuild what has been broken, and the grace to transform your pain into purpose. God bless you all.